Welcome to The Explainer. You know, every single day, the news feels, well, it feels like a giant chaotic puzzle, doesn't it? A political drama over here, some crazy weather event over there, a social crisis somewhere else. It all seems so disconnected. But what if all those scattered pieces actually fit together? Today, we're going to take just one 24-hour period, Saturday, August 16th, 2025, and connect all the dots to uncover the real hidden story of our world. I mean, you know that feeling, right? You pop up on your phone, you start scrolling, and it's just this absolute fire hose of information blasting you in the face. It's a total jumble of headlines from every corner of the globe, and each one is screaming for your attention. But none of them seem to have anything to do with each other. It feels completely random, it's overwhelming, and let's be honest, it's just plain exhausting to try and keep up.
So 1 second, you get a flash of some high-stakes summit between world leaders, and you hear it's all ended in a super tense stalemate. And then, before you can even process that, your screen is just filled with this harrowing footage of a natural disaster, a horrible one that's already claimed hundreds of lives.
And then boom, right after that, there are reports to these massive, out-of-control wildfires burning across an entire continent. It really feels like this daily barrage of just fragments. But what if it's not random? What if these aren't just separate, isolated events? What if they're actually dots that if we just look a little closer, we can connect to tell a single, coherent story about the world we live in? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do right now.
To start finding that pattern, we first have to step onto the global chessboard and take a look at the oldest story in the book, the Great Power Game. This is the arena where leaders and nations are in a constant state of maneuvering for position, this endless dance of push and pull, using diplomacy, tough talk, and sometimes outright confrontation.
Okay, so let's dive right in with the big one, the Trump-Putin summit up in Alaska, supposedly to talk about the war in Ukraine. Now, on the surface, it looks like your standard diplomatic handshake and a photo op. But if you peel back the layers just a little bit, you see this meeting was never really about signing a peace deal. Not at all. It was pure strategic theater. You had Trump, who always wants to be seen as the ultimate deal maker, needing a quick, clear win he could tweet about. He called their 3-hour talk productive, but at the end of the day, he walked away with nothing, saying, no deal until there's a deal. Meanwhile, Putin was playing a totally different game. He was playing the long game. By insisting they had to address the root causes, he made himself look like the thoughtful, serious statesman, and he basically just ran out the clock. He got to fly home with a huge PR victory, looking all reasonable to the rest of the world, without giving up a single thing. It's a perfect example of two leaders playing two completely different sports on the same field. And on this day, one of them played a whole lot better.
So while they were shivering in Alaska, things were heating up in the warm waters of the South China Sea, where a full-blown war of words was exploding. See, down here, the conflict isn't fought behind closed doors. It's being waged in angry press releases. China goes on record slamming the Philippines for illegally entering its territory. The Philippines fires back, condemning China's reckless behavior. Now you might think, it's just talk, but don't you dare dismiss it. In this part of the world, that carefully chosen language is the weapon. Every single statement is a calculated chess move designed to assert control, to test the other side's nerve, and to build a paper trail for whatever they plan to do next, all without firing a single shot. For now, anyway. The tension just keeps ratcheting up, one angry quote at a time.
And speaking of ratcheting up, Indian Prime Minister Modi's big Independence Day speech was an absolute masterclass in raising the stakes. I mean, wow. He didn't just use strong language. He directly accused Pakistan of nuclear blackmail, saying they use their nukes as a shield for terrorist groups. But then he went even further. He weaponized one of the most basic resources for human survival, water. He threatened to pull out of the 65-year-old Indus Water Treaty, a deal that has been a cornerstone of stability in that region for decades, and divert the water. This is a hugely powerful two-pronged attack that takes a political rivalry and threatens to turn it into an existential crisis over who gets to drink, who gets to farm for millions and millions of people.
This big power competition can shrink all the way down to something that seems, well, almost comical, until you realize what's really at stake. Over in the Pacific, the tiny island nation of Tuvalu is threatening to boycott the big Pacific Islands Forum. And why?
because the host nation, the Solomon Islands, which is a close ally of Beijing, has refused to let Taiwan attend. This is a perfect bite-sized example of how the grand competition between the US and China turns everything into a battleground. An invitation, a flag on a table, even a chair at a conference becomes an act of geopolitical warfare. Who gets a seat at the table is, quite literally, the name of the game, and these small island nations have suddenly found themselves on the front lines.
And that brings us to another kind of battlefield, history itself. This day marks the 20th anniversary of Israel's unilateral disengagement from Gaza. Usually an anniversary is a time for reflection, right? Not this one. This one is being actively wielded as a weapon in today's conflicts. For hardliners in Israel, it's proof of a failed experiment, their justification for never giving up another inch of land. For Palestinians, it's a painful memory that fuels their deepest fears of reoccupation. You see, the past isn't just the past, it's ammunition. Both sides are using this one historical event to frame their story, to justify their actions today. It is a perfect textbook example of what experts call narrative warfare, where the story you tell about yesterday becomes your primary weapon for winning tomorrow.
While some are locked in these intense conflicts, others are desperately trying to hold their teams together. The chairman of the West African bloc, ECOWAS, made this really urgent public plea to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These three nations, which are all led by military juntas, recently stormed out of the democratic group to form their own little club, the Alliance of Sahel States. The chairman's plea isn't just about hurt feelings, it's a strategic effort to stop a permanent ideological crack from splitting the continent in two. The big fear here is the creation of a rival autocratic bloc, maybe even backed by Russia, that could challenge the whole democratic order and basically draw a new Iron Curtain right across the Sahel.
And speaking of those nations, inside Mali, the junta is pulling a move straight from page 1 of the political playbook to tighten its grip on power. The government announced it arrested 2 of its own generals and a French national, claiming it had uncovered a coup plot that was being backed by French intelligence. Now, whether that's true or not is almost beside the point. This has all the signs of a classic diversion. When your economy is tanking and people are unhappy, what's the easiest thing to do? You create an outside enemy. By pointing the finger at France, the old colonial power, the junta can stir up nationalist pride, distract everybody from their own failures, and justify cracking down on anyone who opposes them. It's a trick as old as politics itself.
So we've got nations in standoffs, leaders posturing, and history itself being used as a weapon. But while all this human drama was playing out, the planet itself was making its own incredibly powerful moves. And these weren't gentle suggestions either. No, this was the Earth striking back with brutal, indiscriminate force.
Let's just start with a number. Over 280. That's just the initial death toll from absolutely catastrophic monsoon floods that ripped through northern India and Pakistan. This was not just a bad storm. The source material describes it as a textbook case of a climate-amplified disaster. We're talking about these things called cloudbursts, which is an almost unbelievable amount of rain falling in a terrifyingly short amount of time, slamming into the fragile, deforested Himalayan mountains. The result is instant, horrifying landslides and flash floods that just sweep entire villages off the map. It's a devastating sign of a scary new normal.
And at the very same time, a totally different kind of disaster was unfolding in Southern Europe. Fueled by this blistering, non-stop heat wave, we're talking temperatures over 40 Celsius, that's 104 Fahrenheit. These ferocious wildfires are just raging across Spain, Portugal, and Greece. To really get the scale of this, just look at Spain. 158,000 hectares have burned already this year. Now look at the 5-year average. It's more than double. This is not just a bad fire season. This is a continental-level crisis that is stretching firefighting resources to their absolute breaking point. This, we're told, is what summer looks like now.
And just to prove that absolutely nowhere is safe from the planet's volatility, a moderate 5.6 magnitude earthquake shook Queensland, Australia. Now, you have to understand, Australia is supposed to be the stable continent. It's the one that sits all nice and comfy in the middle of a tectonic plate, far away from all the action. This tremor, which was felt by over 6,000 people, was like a geological surprise party that nobody, and I mean nobody, asked for. It's a disruptive, rattling reminder that the ground we stand on is not nearly as solid or as predictable as we'd all like to think.
So the planet is sending some pretty clear signals, right? We've got floods, we've got fires, we've got earthquakes. You would think this would light a fire under our leaders to get together and act. Well, that brings us to Geneva. This is where the latest round of talks to create a global, legally binding treaty to finally end plastic pollution just collapsed, with no deal. So while the Earth is practically screaming for help, our global institutions are stuck, bogged down in arguments. A coalition of oil-producing nations and big corporations managed to block any progress, arguing it would hurt their economies. It's a political disaster piled right on top of a planetary one.
But you know what? It's not all bad news when it comes to the human response. From that political failure, we pivot to a major legal success down in South Africa. In a landmark ruling, a high court there has actually revoked an offshore oil and gas exploration permit given to the energy giant Total Energies. The judge basically said the environmental assessment was deeply flawed because it didn't properly account for the project's impact on climate change. This is a massive, massive win for what's called climate litigation, and it sets a powerful legal precedent that can inspire similar challenges to fossil fuel projects all over the world.
And finally, in what has to be one of the most beautiful and mind-bending ironies of the day, a climate disaster actually uncovered an ancient secret. Those same devastating floods that have been ravaging parts of Texas, well, they washed away layers and layers of earth in a state park, revealing something absolutely incredible: 115-million-year-old dinosaur tracks. These massive three-toed footprints from a 35-foot-long carnivore were literally brought into the light by a modern catastrophe. It's just a stunning contrast. An event that signals a very dangerous future for our species simultaneously resurrects a piece of the planet's deep, deep past.
So, we've seen nations clashing with each other, and the planet pushing back on all of us. And that brings us to our final big question for the day. If governments are gridlocked and nature is completely unpredictable, who is actually running the show inside our own societies? This part is all about the internal struggle for power, for control, and for justice. Let's start this in Haiti, a country just plagued by horrific, out-of-control gang violence. The government is so overwhelmed that they've made a deal with a firm run by a guy named Eric Prince. Now that name might ring a bell. Prince was the founder of the infamous private security company Blackwater, a name that became synonymous with controversy during the Iraq War. Well, his new company is now sending nearly 200 private military contractors, basically soldiers for hire, into Haiti. This isn't a UN peacekeeping mission. This is a for-profit company providing armed security, and it signals a really worrying trend: the privatization of war and security.
And that, of course, immediately raises a critical and, frankly, terrifying question. When the people who are supposed to be providing stability are motivated by profit, who holds them accountable? Who do they answer to? Their shareholders? The government that hired them? Or maybe nobody at all? It's a very murky and dangerous path that completely blurs the line between state power and corporate interests, and it creates a situation where accountability can very easily become a fatal casualty.
Now, let's turn to a place where the question of who's in charge has a very clear and very grim answer. The Taliban just marked its 4th anniversary of taking power in Afghanistan. And how did they decide to celebrate this big milestone? By officially banning women from even attending the celebrations. Now look, this isn't some minor policy detail. This is a core statement of who they are. The act of publicly and formally excluding half of your population from a national celebration sends a grimly consistent message. It reinforces that the systematic repression of women isn't just some unfortunate byproduct of their rule. It is absolutely central to it.
From a government cementing its power, we go to a country that seems to be on the verge of completely changing it. In Bolivia, the final polls are showing that conservative candidates are in the lead just before a huge election. And this is a really big deal. After almost 20 years of leftist rule under figures like Evo Morales, part of what was called the pink tide in Latin America, the country seems ready for a dramatic political shift to the right. Think of it like a political pendulum that's been on one side for a long, long time, and now it looks like it's about to swing all the way back. This election is being watched very closely as a sign of a much broader trend across the entire region.
Now for a fascinating little story about power and justice in one of the world's most strict countries. Singapore is famous, or infamous, for its mandatory death penalty for drug trafficking. It's a hard, unbending rule. But In a highly unusual and very quiet move, the government has granted clemency to a Malaysian drug trafficker who is on death row. Now, this doesn't mean the law is changing, but it is a really significant crack in the facade. It introduces this tiny, unexpected sliver of mercy and discretion into a system that is known for being famously rigid and predictable. It's like finding a small crack in a solid wall of granite. It tells you something might be shifting inside.
And for our last story, let's go back to South Africa, a country still wrestling with the deep, systemic wounds of apartheid, which show up today as rampant poverty and inequality. The president has launched something he calls a national dialogue, and the ambitious goal is to create a people's compact to fix the country. The source material kind of cheekily describes this as trying to solve the nation's problems with its largest ever group therapy session. And you know what? There's some truth to that. It's a grand plan, but as that big question mark on the slide implies, its success depends entirely on moving from talking to doing. The dialogue is the easy part. The real work, that's yet to come.
Okay, so we have jumped all over the globe. We've looked at geopolitical games, planetary disasters, and internal power struggles. It has been a lot to take in. So now, let's pull the camera all the way back and ask, how does this all build into one single picture of our world on this one day?
Here's the most important point. What looked like pure chaos at the beginning was actually a set of clear, interconnected patterns. First, we saw a world of global stalemates. From the summit in Alaska to the angry words in the South China Sea, nations are just locked in these strategic deadlocks. Second, we saw clear and powerful planetary pushback. The Earth is no longer just a passive state for our dramas. It is an active, powerful, and often destructive force in its own right. And third, we saw these deep internal power plays, with societies from Haiti to Afghanistan to Bolivia all grappling with that fundamental question of who holds power and how they should be allowed to use it. These three pressures are shaping our world every single day.
So you see, the story of August 16th, 2025 isn't really a story of random chaos. It's the story of a planet under incredible pressure. Pressure from the outside and pressure from within. The hidden connections are always there if you know how to look. So the real question I have for you is this. Now that you've seen the patterns from today, what patterns will you look for tomorrow? Follow us on Spotify and YouTube to listen to this podcast every morning at 8 a.m. GMT. Thanks so much for joining us on The Explainer. We'll see you next time.